Hello and welcome. My name is Tamara Starling. I am a Black Mental Wellness mentee, and I will be introducing today's session and speakers. So, just before we get started, just a little bit of hop in information. If you'd like to show our speakers some love, you can enter that information, your comments, in the chat using the chat feature to the right under session. Now, if you have any questions for our speakers, I ask that you please use the Q&A feature, also located under the session tab. You'll click session, see Q&A, click there, and then ask a question, and then feel free to type in your question, just so they don't get lost in the comments in the chat. All right, so we will get right into it. Welcome to our session, The Souls of Black Folks, Breaking Through Imposter Syndrome. I want to welcome our speakers, Dr. Antija Allen and Mr. Justin Stewart. Dr. Antija Allen is the Director of Faculty Development and a tenured assistant professor of psychology at Pellissippi State Community College. She is also an adjunct assistant professor at Teachers College, Columbia University, and co-owner of Allen Ivy Prep Consulting, a career coaching firm for faculty members. Mr. Justin Stewart works in financial services and commercial banking as a risk program execution and administration advisor. He is a member of the organization's BOLD network, that's Black Organizers, Leaders, and Doers. And he is a co-owner of Allen Ivy Prep Consulting. Their book, We Are Not Okay, Black Faculty Experiences and Higher Education Strategies, shares the experiences of Black faculty at predominantly white institutions, detailing their unique struggles being an educator, along with how this impacts inclusion, retention, and mental health. Topics within the book include stories of code switching, tokenism, and imposter syndrome. Let us welcome to the stage Dr. Antija Allen and Mr. Justin Stewart.
Thank you. So we're going to jump right in. So throughout this, we will talk about imposter syndrome together. We'll also be sharing excerpts from our book, We're Not Okay, which does discuss imposter syndrome and the impact it has on mental health. It also provides strategies for both organizations and individuals, mental health strategies and strategies that deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and fostering a more inclusive environment for Black faculty, which even if you're not in academia, the strategies are also relevant to other industries. And so right here on the screen, hopefully everybody can see this okay. We have these different statements, and this is an assessment tool that we're all going to do together. So if you have a pen and paper, or you just have some place where you can just write your numbers down, we'd like you to go through 1 through 10 and just write down either 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 for each statement. And in the end, you're just going to add all those numbers up to find out what your score is. So as you're reading the statements, don't think too much about it. Just write down the first number that comes to mind, because if you think too much about it, you might change it from what the actual answer is. So again, right now you're just writing down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for each of these statements, and then you're going to add all of those together. So I'll give you a minute or two just to work through this. And when you're done, you might already see the poll there. There's a poll that says select your scores below. So after you've added all those scores up, please complete that poll. It's either going to be 20 or less, 21 to 30, or 31 to 40. So again, after you've written down all of the numbers, added those up, you should come up with a total somewhere between I think it's 10 and 40. So indicate that on the poll. All right. I just want to make sure everyone is able to see the poll. Okay, we see more votes coming in now. And if you're just joining us, we're doing this assessment. You're just putting down what number you have for each statement, adding all those numbers together, and then you are answering the poll that says select your scores below. All right. Well, I don't want to use up too much time with this. I believe you're able to see the scores, hopefully. So it looks like most of the people who have completed the poll fall under that 21 to 30. So just to give you an idea, this lets you know how much imposter syndrome is impacting your life, right? How intensely and how seriously it's impacting your life. So if you have 20 or less, then that means it's not really impacting your life at all. 21 to 30 means it has like a moderate impact. And then 31 to 40 means that it's more intense, so it's more severe. So in other words, it has a major impact on your life. And we'll also talk about how if it has a major impact on your life, it more than likely is having a major impact on your mental health. And so from the statements, as you read through them, you probably already got an idea of what imposter syndrome is. You maybe already knew what imposter syndrome was before you even came into this session, but I'm going to turn it over to Justin to tell you a little bit more about what imposter syndrome is.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. And thank you all again for joining today's session. So when we talk about imposter syndrome, the overall purpose of this session, we wanted to give you all a little bit more of a clear-cut definition of that term. And we also wanted to present you all this BuzzFeed video. These three women that you're seeing on the screen provide their own experiences in their own lives when dealing with imposter syndrome. So we're going to watch a little bit of that right now.
There's this really pivotal scene in the Thanksgiving episode of the show Masters of None. Angela Bassett plays a mom. She's a mother to Denise. She turns to her. She says, "Honey, we're minorities and we have to work twice as hard to get half as far." For me, imposter syndrome, there was never one big moment. It was all kind of like smaller moments. One of the first ones I felt was I went to a very diverse high school. There was like Latinos, Black people, Asian people, Indian people. And I ended up going to college in Providence, Rhode Island. I went to this liberal arts college. I was there on a scholarship. And I remember my first day of campus. It was a sea of white people. And I was so surprised. And I just thought the world was like my high school. I never felt such a lack of diversity. It was really shocking to me, and I felt insecure. I think I worked hard because I wanted to convince myself that I belonged there.
To me, imposter syndrome is a person who never takes in their successes and always feels like they're waiting on the next shoe to drop or waiting on somebody to find them out. When I started my company, Maybe, which is a stationery company for women of color, I remember hitting these really big milestones. And one of them was I was featured in Essence magazine 6 months into starting my business, and I could never take that in. I could never say, you know what, this happened because I was bold enough to reach out to the magazine. This happened because I started this company from scratch. It was never about what I did. It was about, well, maybe it was just the universe, but it wasn't about my hard work, dedication to making that happen.
My first paid internship was a nonprofit in DC, and it was for an internship program for my college and other colleges in California, and also had a couple Ivy League schools involved with it. I was one of maybe 5 students that had a paid internship, and there were about 200 students in the program. I kept telling myself that I didn't deserve to have a paid internship. The Ivy kids didn't have a paid internship. It didn't make sense to me, despite having worked before and being a politics major and being in DC where politics is such a big thing. I just told myself that it was like kids who I felt were more qualified or deserved it more than I didn't have the same experience that I had. Once I started becoming a manager and leading teams and being, the head of departments and things like that, more often than not only am I the only woman, but I'm the only person of color.
When you're a Black woman, you don't get to be mediocre. You don't get to walk into a place and say, you know what, I'm just going to be all right today.
I think Black women are taught that we are not deserving, as much as I hate to say that. And I think that it's stuck with me, unfortunately. I work hard, and consciously I feel that I'm deserving of things, but subconsciously I don't feel that way. I attribute everything to luck as opposed to just attributing it to me.
I think
Thank you all. So some of the themes that we're going to detail a little bit more in this session as we carry through were themes that were spoken about by these 3 women. These were high achieving women, or are high achieving women, who, despite their objective successes, they still deal with having that failure to internalize their accomplishments. They consistently have self-doubt, and to a degree, this kind of adds onto a fear of being exposed as a fraud or imposter. I'm asking that question, do I really belong here? Am I really supposed to be here? Some data that we pulled from a 2022 or 2020 report from Medical News Today stated that it's a long range of a statistic, but it's about roughly 9% to 82% of people within the US experience imposter syndrome. Additionally, which I think speaks to the video that we just watched, according to a study from KPMG, there are roughly 75% of executive women that report personally experiencing imposter syndrome at some point in their respective careers. So when we're talking about imposter syndrome, we want to look at, for Black men and women, it has been discovered that they are generally the population or the demographic that deals with imposter syndrome on a higher level in comparison to their white counterparts or other communities. Now, when we're looking at this particular data, we're looking at causes of imposter syndrome within the workplace and also within society. So the first stat is, according to a 2020 study, only 3.2% of senior leadership roles at large-based US-based companies are staffed by Black professionals. It may speak to a lot of us in this session, but when we talk about representation, something that we detail thoroughly in We're Not Okay, we talk about the need of representation, not only from an entry-level role, not only from like a mid-leadership role, but across an institution, whether we're talking about higher education, whether we're talking about working at a bank, working in retail. It needs to be representation from top to bottom. That kind of feeds into how you look at yourself as an individual, and wherever you happen to be working, where you see the sky is the limit. If you only see people in certain roles, then maybe that's internally what you're thinking, which kind of feeds into you feeling as though you may not be as qualified as you think when you're looking at certain senior leadership roles. Additionally, approximately 66% of Black professionals feel they need to work harder to advance. I think a lot of us in our upbringing, it speaks volumes. We may have older parents, grandparents that always tell you that, you always have to work a lot harder than your white counterparts or your other counterparts to get half as far. Based on a book that I was recently reading, and as it was stated in the previous video, you can't ride on the coattails of mediocrity, unfortunately. You may have other peers that can ride on mediocrity and be successful, but unless you come with nothing less than perfection, then you're not going to be as successful as you want to be. And then lastly, one of the items that I want to pull off of this list is various microaggressions. You may hear terms in certain settings where you hear things like, oh, you speak so well, or, oh, what school did you go to? Or, oh, where, things of that which kind of minimize your value or kind of speak down to you unintentionally, but most likely it's just from a lack of, or for lack of better terms, due to ignorance. And there's certain terms or certain statements that are made that kind of minimize your accomplishments and kind of make you as an individual feel less valued than you should, and kind of take your accomplishments and put them on a lower level as opposed to putting them at the same level as your peers. When we look at society, in sports, political office, the White House, fictitious mermaids, we're looking at a galaxy far, far away. When it comes to Black people, we are not necessarily embraced in certain roles, in certain capacities, if we excel to a degree in which we're not perceived to excel. This may be due to implicit biases. This may be due to stereotypes, things of that nature, in which when we're sitting in a particular seat, we're made to feel as though we don't belong there. And we have a history of, as it says, being outcasted. And as a result, that also feeds into us internally of imposter syndrome, feeling as though I should be here, as though if we're looking at the Williams sisters, they belong to be at the top tier of tennis. President Obama being the president, things of that nature, even looking at the Little Mermaid, in which it's fictitious, but making her to feel as though this doesn't make sense for you to be a mermaid. Even though this is fictitious, a Black woman as a mermaid, as the Little Mermaid that I know, doesn't make sense. This quote as well that I wanted to pull out kind of further exemplifies what we're stating. So Maya Angelou, even with the accolades that she's attained in her life as a memoirist, a civil rights activist, and a poet, she dealt with her own imposter syndrome. In it, she states that I have written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. So even to the high prestige that we hold Maya Angelou at, she still dealt with her own feeling of imposter syndrome. Now carrying on from the previous slide and dealing with the history of being outcasted, I wanted to share this excerpt that's pulled from We're Not Okay. America is fascinated by the culture of Black people, but that admiration is not always present in the engagement of Black people. From a consumer base, Black culture's mainstream popularization has inspired lingo, fashion, entertainment, and overall lifestyle within the US. The legacy of Jim Crow laws, the Great Migration, the Civil Rights Movement, and now Black Lives Matter, however, has repeatedly demonstrated how the country perceives the people within this culture being treated at best as second-class citizens. Again, it kind of is a companion piece to the previous slide, in which we love Black people, we love their slang, we love their music, we love everything they do. But when it comes to the Black body, the actual Black individual, it's not something that is embraced. It's not something that is, we're not shouting it from the hilltops. But when it comes to the culture, when it comes to the trendiness, when it comes to the fad of Black people, of what Black people provide, that is what's always exemplified. But when it comes to the Black bodies and the level of success that we have, that's always something that seems to be minimized. And now that we've gone over the different ways in which, or the different details, or the different causes of imposter syndrome, I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Allen, who's going to break down what are the different types of imposter syndrome that we deal with.
So there are different types of imposter syndrome, and they are listed here on the slide. So what I want you to do now is read each one and see if there's any place where you feel like it fits for you, whether it be something you're experiencing right now or something that maybe you've experienced in the past. So it could be a current type, or it could be a type that you feel like resonates with you for, oh, maybe this is how I was before. Maybe you overcome imposter syndrome. And so you might notice under polls that there is another poll. It says select the type you most identify with or have identified with in the past. So I'm going to ask you to do that now. One thing I noticed when I looked over the types was that, oh, wait, I could probably pick out at least 3. So like the expert, the perfectionist, superheroes. I can definitely see myself in multiple types. The one that I think stood out the most to me when I was just looking at this recently was the perfectionist. And in that second line in the perfectionist, a perfectionist will focus on areas where they could have done better rather than celebrate their achievements. And so recently I was nominated for an Excellence in Teaching Award. And at first, of course, imposter syndrome right away. Why would I get nominated? Like, of all the people, I've only been here for this many years. There's people who've been here way longer than me. So why would they even nominate me? And then following the nomination, I had to fill out an application and I had to interview. And I remember with the application, I took so long on it because I wanted it to be perfect. And I wrote it in a Word document thinking, okay, so if anything happens, I can always save it. When I went to go cut and paste it into the application, I had too many characters. So what I ended up submitting was an incomplete application. And they still called me for the interview to be considered for the award, which again had me like, why would they pick me? My application was terrible. And so then when I did the presentation, I didn't know the interview required a presentation. I had not prepared for the presentation. So I was thinking to myself, oh, this is going to be bad. Did the presentation, walked out, just knew I didn't get it. And then I received the award. And of course, again, surprise. Why would they give me the award? Look at how imperfect the process was for me. Like just kind of forgetting, but what was the content of my application? What are the things that I've achieved at this institution that have made me worthy of this award? And so I know that's one that resonates with me a lot. And so again, pick which type resonates with you from the poll. I'm seeing a lot of people fall under the same as me, which is the perfectionist. If you have any examples, we're going to welcome you to share your audio, share your video now, and provide any examples for us that you might have. So feel free to do that now. I don't know if I just did this right or wrong. So let us know if you want to share your audio or share your video. Okay, we have some people. This resonates so much with me. A little bit of all of them I'm seeing in the chat. So you can also put it in the chat if you want. Put it, or you can again share your audio and video and speak to us and tell us an example you might have. Unfortunately, I can probably say a lot, especially with this book being successful. There were many times where it was like, oh, it's #1 on Amazon. I was like, how do we get #1 on Amazon? And Justin's like, why are you surprised? Like, it's a good book. Janine, did you want to share? If so, you can unmute yourself. Okay. All right. So in the chat, I'm seeing I'm superheroes. It depends on the situation. And that's true. I feel like depending on what's going on, I can fall into many of these. Another one has perfectionist at work and superhero and everything else. I see it. All right. So I don't want to spend too much more time. Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to move on to the next slide.
All right. So when we're talking more about imposter syndrome, we use all these terms. We've gone through these great exercises, but when we actually think about what it can look like, we wanted to present another video to you all from First Lady Michelle Obama. She spent a lot of time talking about different experiences that she had in her own battles with imposter syndrome. So I'm going to share that with you all right now.
To enter into an elite school when your high school counselor has told you you're not good enough, when all of society sort of looks at kids of color or kids from poor communities or rural communities as not belonging. I, like many others, walked into that school with a stigma in my own head. More young people nowadays call it imposter syndrome. I don't know if they call it that in Britain, where kids like me feel like they don't belong. And I had to work to overcome that question that I always ask myself, am I good enough? And I write about that. That's a question that has dogged me for a good part of my life. Am I good enough to have all of this? Am I good enough to be the First Lady of the United States? And I think that many women, and definitely many young girls of all backgrounds, walk around with that question. But how I overcame that is how I overcome.
So what I think is important that Mrs. Obama did share during this is something that I think speaks to all of us, and which is kind of further exemplified in the excerpt that we have on the left-hand side. We're talking about self-doubt, we're talking about anxiety, and sometimes it can lead to certain mental health or implications or depression. It's one thing to be dealing with this internal battle, but as she did share, we're really looking at some of the external factors to what we talked about earlier about being outcasted. It's almost, if everyone's saying it, is it true? If I think otherwise, but everyone's telling, if I think the sky is blue, but everyone else is telling me the sky is red, is it actually red? And how it kind of messes with your internal psyche. You know yourself, but sometimes people feel as though they know you better than you'll ever know yourself. And as a result, it casts that doubt. It makes you look at yourself in a way that devalues who you are as a person, or devalues how you step out, how you walk into the room when you're around others. Whether you speak up when you have an idea or whether you keep it to yourself. These are the different ways in which imposter syndrome shows its face. When we're looking again to Black faculty, as we shared upon in our book, We're Not Okay, we state that Black faculty consistently work to disprove the stereotype of their incompetence throughout their careers by taking on the stress of proving their merit, even when that merit is apparent. Even though I know I am this, before I even step in the room and I'm an educator, I have to dispel this to my peers. I have to dispel this to my students. And I do all this before I even go about my daily job. And this is on a day-to-day basis. So, sorry about that.
So I think we gave a few examples already of what can actually trigger imposter syndrome. So what we'd ask you to do right now is, if in the chat you can share, what do you know for yourself is a trigger of your imposter syndrome? And I would say, if I had to give an example for myself, I think it's whenever I receive any type of accolade or achievement. I think that always just like triggers my imposter syndrome.
And I think to what Dr. Allen stated, I have that own issue with, even if it's something as simple as taking a compliment. You did good. You did a good job. You did a great job. It's almost like, are they just saying that, or did I actually do a great job? And just having that question of not really feeling comfortable in taking those type of, as Dr. Allen mentioned, accolades or simple compliments to work that I'm doing.
So in the chat right now, please share any triggers that you have when it comes to imposter syndrome. So we have acknowledging my success based on my hard work. The next is, for years it was hard for me to accept compliments. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for all that you shared in the chat. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to read all of them out when we were going through the different types as well. Any other triggers you can think of? Okay, so when someone asks my opinion on something really complex, inferring that I am the smart one or the one that can figure it out. All right. When things don't go exactly as I rehearsed it in my head. Like these presentations.
Sounds like it's about an hour ago.
When people are surprised by my intellect. All right. Thank you for sharing. Justin is going to pull up some triggers that we had on our list to see if there were any that maybe weren't mentioned. Okay, so things like feeling isolated, which is very common if you are the only one of whatever that may be, you know, like, so for me, I'm on the academic leadership team at my job, and I'm the only Black person that is on that academic leadership team. So sometimes being the only one and feeling isolated can really trigger that imposter syndrome. Like, do I even belong in this group? Why, you know, because nobody else here looks like me. Family or environment or upbringing can also be a trigger. Depression and anxiety. taking on a new responsibility or challenge, right? Because like, okay, now I have to figure this out, but am I smart enough to figure this out? And social media. And so we know social media, there's a lot of things on there that aren't quite what they seem. And so just, realizing that this isn't someone's real life, this isn't their real situation. But yet somehow it still causes us to feel imposter syndrome as a result. So now I'm going to turn it over back to Justin.
Thank you. So now that we've seen what it looks like, now we want to see what it feels like. So I'm going to give you all a few moments just to read these two excerpts. These Dr. Shaquille O'Neal Marsh and Dr. Antoine Tomlin. They were also contributing authors to We're Not Okay, and this was their experience when it dealt with imposter syndrome. So I'll give you all a moment to read through those. So as you see through what was shared by Dr. Marsh and Tomlin, we have instances of feeling that self-doubt, which goes without saying. But one of the things that we shared earlier, the sense of being a fraud, feeling as though, am I really supposed to be here? Did I kind of find myself here through luck, through up and stance, through things of that nature? Am I actually not as qualified as I think I am? And as a result, is someone going to find out that I'm not supposed to be here? That fear internally of, if I'm presented with a new challenge, as Dr. Allen mentioned, is someone going to find out that I'm not supposed to actually be here? And additionally, having that issue with or internalizing success. When I do well, when I have an accomplishment, whether it's somebody providing me an accolade or providing me a compliment, it just doesn't sit right with me. I don't think that I am belonging of this high praise that I'm receiving. So these are the different things that we talk about when we're talking about what imposter syndrome can feel like, how it can be internalized and how it can be projected out. So we're going to hand it back over to Dr. Allen.
So thinking about how this impacts our mental health, and it came up quite a bit already. I think you can already see, but imposter syndrome is not a disorder. It's not recognized as a mental illness. It's not a psychological disorder, but it can lead to other disorders that are recognized, such as anxiety or depression. And, kind of going back to many of the examples that have already been shared throughout, Black faculty, again, not just because of that feeling of isolation, because they're the only one, but also because of being marginalized, because of the discriminatory practices that come from being in dealing with systemic racism, really, in higher ed. All of those things end up impacting someone's mental health.
One of the things that we did share, and it's been a common theme throughout this session in general, is how women in the workplace or women in society have to deal with imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome also presents challenges to the mental well-being among Black faculty and is highly but not exclusively experienced by Black women faculty. It occurs often among high-achieving Black women within academia, where people with institutional power and authority simultaneously overburden them with work while questioning their authority. As we state this, it's not just something that's specific to higher education. And I think as we shared throughout, as you all have shared, through the chat, it's not within a certain industry. When we look at this hierarchy of sometimes a male-dominated hierarchy or a white dominated hierarchy, there are certain perceptions. And as a result, there's kind of additional pressure that's put on those that don't fit within that standard or fit within that box. And these are some of the mental health implications, as Dr. Allen shared, that unfortunately do specifically impact Black women.
For time purposes, I just want you to think about these questions to yourself before we move on to the next slide. So which of your successes are you not taking ownership of? Think about that. Are certain beliefs you have about success holding you back? And which of your strengths are you overlooking? So just kind of like process that for yourself. We're going to move on to the next slide. So how do we go about changing that mindset? And I think coming from a psychology background, I think a lot about like reframing our thinking. I think a lot about things like cognitive restructuring, or just like kind of like changing our thoughts, right? And so I found this graphic about challenging negative thoughts. And I invite you to obviously look at the entire thing. One part that stood out to me personally was, what would I say to a friend who felt this way? And it's really interesting when I think back about conversations I had with my friends. If a friend were to say to me, oh, I can't believe, that they promoted me, I would be like, of course they promoted you. You are awesome. Like, why wouldn't they promote you? But yet I would have that same thought of, I don't know why they would promote me. Right. So like, think about if that happened with your friend, what would you tell your friend? So kind of, what would you tell your friend? Now tell that to yourself. All right. So this is something you can work through on your own. But in the spirit of Black mental wellness, I will suggest that you should work through this probably with a psychologist, right? And so that psychologist can do more than just help you with challenging those negative thoughts. They can also help you with validating those feelings you may be having. Because I mean, they're still valid feelings, regardless of whether, they're absolutely true or not, that you're not good enough, but it's still valid that you're feeling that way. And so they can kind of help you just work through these different things so we don't end up in a state of depression or constant anxiety. So we're going to move on to the next slide.
So as you all continue to start building your action plan, we want to make sure that we provide you with as many resources as possible. So we want to provide this start, stop, continue model. So this, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's used by a lot of companies, usually as a team effort, and it's used by leaders. We consider it like an action-orientated process or technique to increase the effectiveness, or we'll say productivity of workflow processes. But Dr. Allen and I felt as though this is something that is also applicable to you as an individual, based on what we've shared so far in, we know the problem, so what can we do to kind of devise a solution or prepare a solution? So when you all are going through this process of doing start, stop, and continue, what does it actually mean? When we're looking at start, or look at what's missing, when it comes to your development, when it goes to what you're dealing with internally or having that self-doubt, what are things that you think can, and I think the last slide that we shared is a good model of looking at what is missing exactly. What can I start implementing in my life that will help me with these feelings of self-doubt, with these feelings of not appreciating or valuing myself and my accomplishments and what I've done? When we're looking at stopping, what are certain items that are getting in the way? What's serving as like a block, serving as a wall? What's getting in my way from progressing in the way that I need to? What's going on in my mind that honestly isn't providing any real value to me? We can have a lot of self-doubt. We have a lot of instances where we may not feel the best. What are those items that we need to find a way to pull out of our mindset as we can move forward? And then finally, when we get to the continue process, let's look at what's working. We always use the term, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So what are we currently doing that, we put as a top priority? Sometimes I think it's easier to look at the negatives as opposed to the positives. So let's take what's working. What are these positive attributes? What are these positive affirmations that we have for ourselves? And let's put this in the first position. Let's put these in the driver's seat. And by implementing all three of these items, you'll be able to devise your own action plan. Again, because of the sake of time, we will not have you all craft your own action plan, but take a screenshot, definitely use this for later. But these should be the items that you're thinking about when you're developing your own action plan. What are we going to start doing? What are we going to stop doing? And what should we continue doing?
And feel free to share in the chat, even if you just want to say something that you'd want to start, something that you want to stop, and something that you want to continue. Maybe stop. You might want to stop self-doubt. You might want to start embracing your accomplishments. And if there's anything you're already doing that it seems to be working, that is something that you'd want to continue. So please feel free to share in the chat, because that might be something that could be helpful to someone else who's present today.
And as we close out, wanted to bring it back to First Lady Michelle Obama. And she earlier discussed her own struggles with imposter syndrome. So I think it appropriate for her to close out to see what ways has she been able to overcome her own imposter syndrome.
University, been associate dean. I've been the vice president in community development at a hospital. I've been, I run a nonprofit organization. I've worked in the government. I worked with the mayor in the city of Chicago. I worked in the Department of Planning and Development. I was First Lady of the United States of America. I've seen these seats. I've served on corporate boards. I've done it, not all, but I've done a lot. And I'm just telling you, there are a lot of people who don't belong there. And every table, I thought it was me. And after a little bit, I was like, nope, it's him. It's this guy who's sitting here talking.
But they
all
act
the time.
so well. They act like they belong.
That's because they've been told they belong there. They don't. But there's a presumption. That's what I'm saying. It's in his head too. He's like, I belong here. And I'm like, no, you don't. So all I can tell is on nothing that the person sitting next to you was told based on nothing that he belongs there. And you were told that you weren't. Both things are wrong, oftentimes. So what I had to learn to do for myself was age helps you with imposter syndrome. So I'm 55 now, and I've seen it. I've been waiting to be as bad as people told me I would be, I've been waiting for when I was going to fall and mess up and fail. I've been waiting because that's what they said. I didn't belong at Princeton, right? I applied to Princeton University. My college counselor said, that's school's too much for you. Well, I applied anyway. I got in. I was waiting for it to be hard and for everybody else to be so much smarter. They weren't. They were just told that they belong there. Same thing was true when I applied to Harvard Law School. Maybe I shouldn't be there. Got there. Nope. They're not any smarter than me. So with all the practice of just going into the room that you weren't supposed to be in and being there and occupying those seats and just doing you and knowing that your thoughts are just as relevant, your experiences are just as important, your insight is just as valuable, so that you will share it and use it and practice being there. That's the work you have to do if you feel like an imposter, because he isn't giving up his seat easily. He isn't going to just say, oh, I understand you don't feel like you belong here. Well, let me make room for you and sit you down and tell you the things you need to hear. They're not going to do that for you, because a lot of times they don't even want you there, even when they need you there. So you can't count on somebody else giving you the self-confidence. That's not how we work, and that's why you all are important, because you're not going to do that for some kid in your life. You're going to make sure that they never feel like an imposter. You're going to help them practice a different set of messages so they aren't sitting here wondering where they belong in places where we need them. We need women and diverse minds and people who think differently and have different religious beliefs, because truth and the right answer comes from diversity of experiences. You're needed at those tables. So you can't sit there wondering whether you belong, because you'll waste your time in those seats and you'll hold your voice back and you won't be able to make change because you're waiting for somebody to tell you that you belong. I'm telling you, you belong. Practice a different set of messages.
Thank you for saying that. So important.
Yes, thank you very much, First Lady, for stating that. So as we do wrap up, if you all take nothing away from this session, we want to make sure we highlighted these 5 points that we've discussed throughout the conversation today. We appreciate your engagement. We wanted to make sure you have these take-home items. Moving forward, as you address your own imposter syndrome, make sure you're always communicating your value. In addition to that, own your accomplishments. Level comparison to others. It's not always about what's going on the left, what's going on the right. It's about what's going on right here. And what can I do to make sure that I feel the way that I know? How can I feel internally how I feel, how I perform externally? Make sure that you practice self-acceptance. There are instances where you're not always going to be 100% perfect. We're not looking for perfection. You shouldn't be looking for perfection. So make sure that you're able to accept all of the opportunities or certain gaps that you may have. It doesn't mean that you're broken, it just means that you're a human being. And lastly, if you're not able to do that on your own, make sure that you seek external assistance. This could be a friend, this could be therapy. Find a way to communicate certain instances of this imposter syndrome and find a way to like dig deep into it and kind of get to the root of the problem. And hopefully we'll be able to uproot ourselves from this imposter syndrome. So. But thank you again. Thank you all for joining us today. Again, my name is Justin Stewart.
Oh, am I supposed to say my name now? Antija Allen. Thank you so much.
If you all would like, you can contact us through either allenivyprep@gmail.com. We also have our website, allenivyprep.org. Here's our book, We're Not Okay. If you are interested in purchasing it, you can use the QR code, which we will leave on the screen. I know we have a few minutes left for questions. If you would also like to connect with us, we continue this conversation on a daily basis. These are our handles on social media. So thank you again. And now we'll open the floor if there's any questions.